For the first time in NFL history, two rookie quarterbacks, both selected in the first round, will face off in prime time. It's amazing that it's taking this long to happen, but it's also the reason why the quarterbacks are going to take center stage this Sunday night when the Falcons face the Commanders. That and more on this crossover episode of Locked On Commanders and Locked On Falcons.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into this crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Commanders and Locked On Falcons, both shows part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm David Harrison. He is Aaron Freeman. We are the hosts of Locked On Commanders and Locked On Falcons, respectively. And these are your daily podcasts, of course, covering each of these NFL teams. If you haven't already, please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are tuning in for this special holiday season crossover Thursday episode, where we're going to ask, who does number 2 work for? And no, that's not just a corny movie reference. We're talking about second, third, fourth, fifth receivers and how each team is going to make them work for them to get a win this weekend. The Commanders are trying to take this game to the ground, but we're going to kick off this episode talking about quarterbacks. First time the NFL will have 2 rookie quarterbacks drafted in the first round, each of them facing off in prime time. It's one of those LeBron type stats, but it's also kind of amazing that it's taken this long for the NFL to get this thing done. Today's crossover Thursday episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, all lowercase, to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. We thank you for coming through today. Every day is both episodes of both shows. A special thank you for coming through every single day. Aaron Freeman, appreciate you making time out for me on this Christmas day. Happy holidays to you. Merry Christmas or whatever holiday you're celebrating this time of year, man. Hope you're doing well. Hope your family is doing well. Hope the Falcons, first place in the NFC South, are pretty happy right now. So what's going on around the Atlanta Falcons these days?
Well, thank you, David. Happy Merry Christmas to you and a Happy New Year. And the vibes this week in Atlanta are great. They hadn't been great for several weeks. And so that's the main thing going on with Michael Penix coming off an impressive NFL debut, looking like, a multi-year veteran quarterback. I know the Commanders fans, have had similar, observations with their rookie quarterback this year. And it's nice. It's nice to be in a good spot with the Atlanta Falcons this past week. Got to give a shout out to my guy, Cooper Rush, who gave the best Christmas gift ever by beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and getting the Falcons back into a situation where, they potentially could clinch a playoff spot this Sunday night.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Look, if the Atlanta Falcons beat the Washington Commanders and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers lose to the Carolina Panthers, then they win the NFC South and are going to go to the postseason. For the Washington Commanders, if the Washington Commanders win and beat the Atlanta Falcons, they're in the playoffs. If the Tampa Bay Buccaneers lose to the Carolina Panthers, then the Commanders are in the playoffs regardless of what happens Sunday night. So basically what we're saying is that everybody watching this show right now is a Carolina Panther fan this weekend because, of course, Commanders fans, as much as you want to see them beat the Falcons, you would love to just come into Sunday night and just be able to enjoy the game without the stress of playoff seeding hanging over your head. Aaron, I want to ask you more about Michael Penix because obviously one game, right? Dan Quinn talked about him earlier this week to us in a press conference, said that he came in as part of that infamous mass visit that the Washington Commanders had, took them all to Top Golf and did all this stuff and allegedly ruffled the feathers of the quarterback they actually ended up taking, who has not had his feathers ruffled, I promise you. But Dan said Michael Penix, his leadership, his strength has always kind of shown through, his arm talent, all those things. Basically, the reason they kind of came off of him on the draft board and didn't really consider him for number 2 overall was because he just doesn't play the same style of football they were looking to play, which is the Jayden Daniels run and gun. I've talked about this with Commanders fans who have been frustrated about the lack of short yardage passes to guys like Luke McCaffrey. Jayden Daniels' check down is running the ball. How do you describe Michael Penix Jr.'s game, even though you've only seen him for one start so far?
Yeah, so far, his game is very much more of, I'm going to run the offense. My checkdowns are actually checkdowns to the running backs and tight ends rather than, doing the thing that Jayden Daniels has done so well this year, which is, if it doesn't come open, I'll just run it in. There's a pretty good chance that I can bust this thing for like a 20-yard gain or something like that. And it's like, okay, well, you took a bad thing and you made it into a very big positive. And I think with Michael Penix, the thing that stood out in his start was the poise his ability to execute the offense at a fairly high level, considering like it wasn't like the greatest start. You probably look at the stats and you're like, okay, what's that impressive about, his stat line, 18 for 27 or whatever it was, for 202 yards and an interception. That really wasn't his fault, but it was just really with going back to the illustrious month of Kirktober, where you saw, Kirk Cousins being able to get the ball into the hands of his playmakers. That's something that Michael Penix was able to do this past Sunday, and just looking like a quarterback that, wasn't making his first NFL start, but really kind of making his 14th or 15th NFL start in that sort of comfort in the offense and operating at a high level.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because, I go back to the draft season, right? And I remember you talking about this specifically. Like, a lot of people criticize the Atlanta Falcons for taking the quarterback after spending all the money on a quarterback and not giving him weapons, a la the Green Bay Packers when they drafted Jordan Love and didn't help Aaron Rodgers out. But it was repeated during that time. Like, this isn't about the player, Michael Penix Jr. This is about the team decision and the franchise direction and all these other things. So now you see Michael Penix step on the field, and I think you say the word poise, and that really strikes me because Jayden Daniels has been complimented for his poise. Bo Nix has been complimented for his poise. Now Michael Penix Jr. is being complimented for the same. Drake May, I'm not fully tuned into his beginning of his career, but I know there have been times where he's also been complimented for similar type of things. And I think what it boils down to, man, a lot of it is the right fit for the right young quarterback. When you look at Zach Robinson, the offensive coordinator, this coming from the Rams, Matt Stafford, Jared Goff, pocket passers, guys who like to stand tall in the pocket and kind of do those things. So Michael Penix Jr. kind of fitting into that role. It seems to fit. Like, I don't know how much he would want to do things with like a Jayden Daniels or JJ McCarthy type, but obviously he has experience with this type of quarterback. So I'm glad that it's working out. And I think a lot of Commanders fans are glad it's working out for Michael Penix Jr., just not this Sunday. On the other side of things, to help out Michael Penix Jr., all right, we're going to talk about Michael Penix versus Jayden Daniels, but really Jayden Daniels is going to face that Falcons defense. I'm a massive fan of Jessie Bates. So I want to ask you first off, how has Jessie done with the Atlanta Falcons? But overall, how is that defense looking? Specifically, is there a pass rush developing down in Georgia?
Yeah, Jessie Bates is playing great. He had a pick six last week. We've been missing those sort of game-changing plays from Jessie Bates this year, not because he hasn't been, in a position to make them, but it's just other issues on the defense have not necessarily performed at the level that you want to allow Jessie Bates to be put in a position to make those sort of game-changing plays. But the last couple of weeks, the defense has made major strides, particularly with the pass rush that, depending on sort of what version of pass rush metrics that you look at, whether it's win rate or sack percentage or total sacks or whatever, basically the Falcons are either like number one or number two in terms of sacks since their week 12 bye. And so I think that's going to be a huge part of their ability to keep a player like Jayden Daniels contained, where Washington has been very effective with the QB run game. As we mentioned before, Jayden Daniels' ability to just kind of, okay, when the secondary and the back seven lock it down in coverage, I'll just take off and run. And the Falcons have really struggled against mobile quarterbacks throughout this season. But, you go back to when this pass rush first came alive a couple of weeks ago against the Chargers and Justin Herbert, they did a much better job sort of corralling Justin Herbert because they were able to sort of not only get pressure, but when he did look to run and scramble and extend plays outside the pocket, they were able to get him down on the ground to create those negative plays in terms of sacks. And so the hope is that they can do something similar with Jayden Daniels. It's going to be a challenge. The Falcons do not quite have the level of athleticism at the linebacker position, nor do they really have the depth at the safety position, especially with Jessie Bates being their most talented guy sort of patrolling on the back end, to sort of just say, okay, go spy Jayden Daniels. And so it's really going to be up to that front to really sort of keep him contained more so than, one individual player in the back seven being able to spy him.
Yeah, and that's something, man, I'll tell you, I think the best performance I've seen a defense have against Jayden Daniels honestly was the Philadelphia Eagles. Not this last weekend, but the Thursday night that they played back in week 11. Vic Fangio, known for not wanting to stack the box anyway, but didn't stack the box at all against him, was able to get home with that front a little bit more, keep things spread out, keep people in front of Jayden Daniels to contain him. This last week, however, Aaron, not as much success, not nearly as much success. Jayden Daniels over 300 yards of offense, accounted for, the leading rusher for the team. We'll talk a little bit more about that kind of stuff coming up here in a minute. But how much can the Falcons try to emulate that style? Can the Falcons contain Jayden Daniels without overcommitting more rushers to try to pressure him because that is how defenses get gashed by him, is by leaving lanes open. Because you bring 6 rushers, you're going to have Green in front of them.
Well, the Falcons like to rush 4 and rush 3 a lot. So I think that's going to be sort of their strategy, which is we'll drop 8 and that will have more bodies underneath, that if he does decide to tuck it and run, we'll have more guys that hopefully will have the proper angle in order to tackle him. But as you've seen many times, and you saw this last week against Philadelphia, Jayden Daniels can outrun some angles. He's done that throughout his career, even going back to his college days. So that's going to be a challenge for the Falcons. But I think by and large, they're going to try to bring 4 with some of their simulated pressure looks, especially with that 4th guy being Caden Ellis, their middle linebacker, who's been one of their more productive pass rushers over these last 6-7 games, as well as Arnold Ebiketie, who loves the speed rush. He's been able to win a lot with the speed rush the last couple of weeks, but getting, too far upfield with Jayden Daniels being able to just sort of step up in the pocket and then, break contain will be a challenge. So I think those 2 guys, along with the rest of the Falcons 4-man pass rush, will be tasked with trying to keep Jayden Daniels corralled. It's going to be a challenge for the Falcons just because, I don't know if they have a Nolan Smith. I don't know if they have a Josh Sweat, those types of guys, a Jalen Carter type of guy that can really sort of dominate and win his one-on-ones in the ways that you've seen with that Philadelphia front. So I think because of the recent success of the pass rush, I think they have a better shot than I would have told you, any point during the season, but it is definitely going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and Jayden Daniels has been a big part of that offense, throwing and running. The question for the Washington Commanders offense coming into this weekend is going to be, can they get the rest of the ground game going along with Jayden, or Jayden going to have to continue to start putting on that superhero cape that they avoided trying to put on him early this season? We'll get into the Washington Commanders side of this contest coming up next on this crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Falcons and Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you in part by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Because that's definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending, and it helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, and even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members for up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, that feature, finding those unwanted subscriptions, was the biggest key. But tracking all of my spending as I travel around the country covering these Washington Commanders games has been absolutely clutch as well. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Locked On Falcons, Locked On Commanders, crossover Thursday, previewing this week's Sunday night football matchup between these 2 teams. A lot of playoff implications potentially on the line here as these 2 teams clash. We've been talking about the Atlanta Falcons, everything going on there on that side of the ball. Aaron, let's kick it over to the Washington side of things. I'm going to tell you right now, the immediate current day, present day concern on the offense is getting the ground game going outside of Jayden Daniels, right? Like, Jayden has been great. If you stat scouted, if any Falcons fans out there stat scouted the Commanders versus Eagles, you're going to look at it, you're going to say, man, Commanders ran for 113 yards, averaged 4.7 yards per carry. They had a pretty good game running the ball. Here's the problem. That was all Jayden Daniels. Brian Robinson carried the ball 10 times for 24 yards, 2.4 yards per carry. That is not good for your fantasy team, for the real team, for any team. And it was the 4th time this year that B-Rob has been held under 3 yards per carry, which is a career high for him. Aaron, we came into this season looking at Brian Robinson and looking at this power run game and saying this is going to be the catalyst to get this offense off the ground. It's run first, but it's not just run first. It's power run first. It's not Austin Eckler slash and dash. It's Brian Robinson punishing the middle of defenses, forcing them to collapse in, opening up the edges for Jayden Daniels, giving him more time in play action to find open receivers. And that's exactly what we had for the first 12, 13 weeks of the NFL season. The last couple weeks, though, I don't know if it's the offensive line, if it's defenses, if it's B-Rob, a combination of the 3. People are starting to figure out how to stop Brian Robinson from taking over the game. Fortunately, Jayden Daniels put on the cape and has been able to save the day. The question right now is, if it happens again against Atlanta, can Jayden continue to put that cape on, or is the rookie, he's a rookie, right? Is the rookie thing going to finally come back to bite this team in the butt?
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. And Brian Robinson had 2 fumbles last week as well. Has that been an issue this
First
season?
Multi-fumble game of his career. So
okay, I was wondering if that was something, because I know, watching him before, I didn't think fumbles were ball security was something that he was particularly good in, but that sort of stood out to me rewatching the game last week. And so I think Washington has probably what it takes to get the run game reestablished. The Falcons have really struggled this year against teams that will spread them out by playing 11 personnel, those 3 wide receiver sets. That forces the Falcons to have to play their nickel defensive front. And that nickel defensive front has not been very good stopping the run, especially for teams that like to run downhill with power, with inside zone, with, pulling guys and all that's various things. And you saw last week in the Giants game, the one scoring drive that the Giants had was at the end of the first quarter, where they were committed to running the football, and they were able to move the ball effectively against the Falcons. And then they basically abandoned the run after that point. And then, the game got out of hand for them. And so I think if Washington is willing to commit to trying to, use Brian Robinson, especially between the tackles, to sort of, have a rebound sort of performance, I think that is something that has been successful for other teams going up against this Falcons defense. So it is a good week to try to get that thing going. And so that you have potentially a 2-headed monster with this Washington team, with not only, we can run it with Brian Robinson and get 4, 5, 6 yards a pop, versus, when we do drop back to throw it, we also have Jayden Daniels that can, turn a good coverage play for the Falcons defense into a bad run defensive play because of that ability to tuck in and run.
Yeah, and that is the hope for the Washington Commanders this week. Dan Quinn kind of made a little bit of an alluded a little bit to the Tennessee Titans game, and I think there's a little bit of similarity here in the way that they want to attack the Falcons defense, the way they attacked the Titans defense, and the way they did that, and the success they were able to have up front led to Brian Robinson averaging 6.4 yards per carry in that game, went over 100 yards with a rushing touchdown and only 16 carries. And actually Chris Rodriguez, who is their other kind of power back, obviously the backup power back, was able to come in, get a little over a dozen carries, and have almost 100 yards himself and another touchdown. I don't know that they're going to have as much success against the Titans as they did the Falcons. Statistically, Falcons actually have a worse run defense this year, so obviously there's going to be some optimism from the Commander side of this thing there. But defensively, there's some optimism in this defense, Aaron, because the Washington Commanders finally did not collapse in the fourth quarter of a game defensively. They almost gave away a game against the New Orleans Saints a couple weeks ago. They've had a run of games where they're just giving up points in the fourth quarter, the second half specifically, costing them games. In week 16, they flipped the script and they said, you know what, we're just going to give the Eagles all the points in the first quarter. 21 points allowed in the first quarter. The first time this season, the Commanders defense has given up more than 7 points in any first quarter. And then they went on to give up only 6 points in the fourth quarter. Only the third time in the last 7 weeks, they've given up less than 12 points in a fourth quarter. So the question for the Commanders defense is, can they put together a 60-minute defensive performance? The question for the Falcons is, can you take advantage of the fact that the Commanders are known for having at least one quarter in every game where they give up a butt ton of points? Aaron, is this an offense with Michael Penix Jr. second career start that's capable of doing that if the Commanders open that door on Sunday night?
We'll see, David. That's where we're at with Michael Penix with one game. That's really what these next 2 games is kind of like, okay, where exactly is this offense? Where exactly is this young quarterback? And so we'll find out a lot more of those answers. I think if Commanders fans are worried about the fourth quarter, traditionally the Falcons do not. They're dead last in the NFL in fourth quarter points scored this year. They averaged like about 3.2 points. They scored 3 last week against the Giants. So they didn't really, necessarily be able to pad their stats a little bit to get out of bottom place with that. So, if it comes down to, who's going to be able to, if it's a close game in the fourth quarter, traditionally the Falcons, have not been the team that has been trusted in those situations outside of the first couple of games of the season to be able to make the plays that they need to in the fourth quarter in order to win those sorts of games. So, we'll see. It basically is at this point where it's just like I'm just as curious about what this Falcons offense looks like in Michael Penix's second start as I'm sure all the Commanders and Falcon fans listening are as well. So it's just basically like, I think the Falcons do have that ability, especially if they can get Bijan Robinson going with the run game as well as the passing game, and getting some more opportunities to get him matched up one-on-one against Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner, and the Falcons being able to spread the ball around to, potentially Drake London if he's not dealing with a hamstring injury that forced him to exit midway through that Giants game, getting Kyle Pitts back involved in the offense, as well as, finding ways to get Darnell Mooney and Ray McLeod going as well. So if the Falcons can kind of spread the ball around, that makes me feel a lot better about their ability to have one of those big quarters. But so far, we'll just sort of have to wait and see.
Yeah. And I'll just tell you selfishly, look, nothing against Kirk Cousins, but I'm really happy that I get to see Michael Penix Jr. play in person for the first time myself, for the second time, obviously himself in the NFL. So obviously these quarterbacks are going to play a big role in this game, but how they spread the ball, like Aaron Freeman just said, when healthy, both these teams have a pretty clear number one receiver on their team. It's the number 2, 3, 4, and 5 options that could dictate the outcome of this week's game between the Falcons and Commanders. We'll talk more about that coming up next on this Crossover Thursday episode, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is also brought to you in part by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here. Both the Commanders and the Falcons are vying for positions in the postseason tournament, and it's not too late for you to get on all the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers, you can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a dub this regular season. I love betting on which players are going to score touchdowns and how many points each team is going to score in my same game parlays. It's a lot of fun, adds a little bit of excitement to some games that maybe you otherwise would not be as interested in. And not only can you bet on who's going to win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for passing yards, rushing yards, total points scored, and so much more, including placing a bet on the Washington Commanders versus the Atlanta Falcons game this weekend, where the Commanders are favored right now by 4.5 points. The over-under for total scoring is set to 47.5. So visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. This week's Crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Falcons and Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app, use the code Locked On NFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. We're going to get into the 3 things that each side of this competition must do in order to win. And Aaron Freeman, we're going to kick it off with you. The Atlanta Falcons visiting the Washington Commanders Sunday Night Football, Week 17. What are the 3 things that you think the Atlanta Falcons have to do in order to get the upset win over the Washington Commanders?
So the main 3 things: number 1, contain the quarterback with pressure. Number 2, win the turnover battle. And number 3, spread the football around on offense. I think, going back to number 1, as we've discussed a lot, like, you got to get Jayden Daniels on the ground. Again, he's going to pop some runs. He's going to do some things that we have seen him do throughout his rookie season, but you can't let that sort of take over the game in the ways that previous running quarterbacks or mobile quarterbacks have been able to do against this Falcons defense. And that starts with that front 4 being able to get reliable pressure on him to get him on the ground, not only as a passer, but also as a runner, and containing him in that way. I think with the turnovers, I think that's been, at least in my eyes, a big part of Washington's kind of recent struggles, where for the first, 7-8 games of the season, they rarely turn the ball over. And these last couple of weeks, you've seen them, turn the ball over a ton, especially last week. And so if the Falcons can be opportunistic, and guys like Jessie Bates can get those interceptions on the back end, and they can force fumbles like Philadelphia was able to do, and play a clean game, which is something that Michael Penix, again, he had an interception before the halftime, but that was basically a drop pass by Kyle Pitts. Not his fault. And that's been a big issue. That's a big reason why Kirk Cousins is no longer starting, because the Falcons could not protect the football. So we need to see a clean game from Michael Penix. We need to see a clean game from this Falcons offense as far as turnovers go, and hopefully a very dirty game for the Washington Commanders when it comes to turnovers. And then the last thing is spread the ball around. Kyle Pitts has been basically a much maligned player among Falcon fans, but there's no doubt that this Falcons offense is better when he's involved, along with Drake London and Darnell Mooney and Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, and it becomes a pick your poison with all these different weapons that the Falcons have. And if they can get back to playing that style of football with Michael Penix like they were playing earlier in the season when this offense was really humming under Kirk Cousins during the illustrious month of Kirktober, that is something that this team can, really use to, and that's, I think, going to be a big part of if they are able to put up enough points against this Commanders team to win this game, because I don't think the offense is going to be able to score 20 points like they did last week. They got 2 defensive touchdowns off of pick sixes last week. But I do think the offense is going to probably need to score 28 plus or whatever in order to win this game, given how hot this Commanders offense is. And I think they can do that if they can spread the ball around.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head on a lot of those things. Speaking of that turnover margin, though, man, 5 offensive giveaways. I personally have obviously never seen a team win a game doing that. And Dan Quinn said he's never seen a team do that. And shout out to Chick Hernandez of WSA 9 here out in the DC area. He did some digging and found out that it was the first time in 86 occurrences that a team turned the ball over 5 times, allowed 30 points to their opponent, and won. It's amazing that just kind of shows you how rare it is. Obviously, the Commanders are happy they got that win. They don't want to get another win that way. They're +2 overall in the season now after that terrible turnover game in the overall turnover margin. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head right there, because Dan Quinn, I guarantee you, Joe Witt Jr., Cliff Kingsbury, when they talk on Thursday, the 2 coordinators for the Commanders are going to harp on turnovers, not turning the ball over, getting more takeaways. Obviously, Washington Commanders fans would love to see Mikey Sainristil repeat his 1 interception for an 81-yard return against Michael Penix Jr. that he had the last time these 2 guys saw each other. It's all love, of course. So for the Commanders, there are 3 things they've got to do, Aaron. Establish that ground game without having to rely on Jayden Daniels to do it. We talked about that earlier in the episode. The reason that's the main storyline for the offense is because that is the first thing I think this team absolutely is going to want to do. Number 2, stifle Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier. That 2-headed rushing attack. This run defense has not been great over the course of the season. The Atlanta Falcons are one of the best in being able to do that. Because I have Bijan Robinson on my fantasy team, obviously I'm not a fan of Tyler Algier, but outside of that, big fan of both of these guys for a good reason. And take advantage of Michael Penix's pocket tendency. Take advantage of the fact that they can kind of get after him a little bit more aggressively than they can some other quarterbacks, and score early. The best way to take the ball out of Bijan's hands, out of Tyler's hands, score early, force the Atlanta Falcons to lean on Michael Penix Jr. No shade to Michael Penix Jr. Anytime you have a rookie quarterback in their second start, I guarantee you, New York Giants, week 2, they said, let's force Jayden Daniels to beat us. Now, Jayden Daniels and a rookie franchise record 7 field goals did beat them. The Commanders are going to take the same approach here. Make Michael Penix Jr. beat you, and they're going to hope that they don't give up the points to allow him to do so. So I think those are the 3 things that the Washington Commanders have to do. I'm going to break all of those 3 things down as I do every Friday, every week ahead of games. Later on this week on Locked On Commanders, Aaron Freeman has got more great things going on for you over at Locked On Falcons. So Commanders fans, make sure you're coming through. Falcons fans, make sure you're coming through on that side. And Commanders fans specifically, you want to be smart about this matchup, make sure you go see Aaron Freeman. Definitely one of the best in the network. Always great doing crossover Thursday episodes with Aaron. Back in my days in NFC South, we got to do it twice a year, man. Now I'm glad that we at least still get to do it. This is twice in the last 3 years we've got to do it, with Washington and Atlanta taking on each other twice in the last 4 years. I don't know, 3 years, 4 years, whatever it is. On the next episode of Locked On Commanders, Locked On Falcons, we'll wrap up all of our final thoughts on this conversation. Until then, make sure you're also checking out Locked On NFL in the morning. The madman Tyler Rowland is going to give you a double shot of NFL espresso in the afternoon. You get the barbershop vibes with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. It's all new Locked On NFL, and it is twice a day. As always, we want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders or Locked On Falcons your first listen of the day, every dayers. We appreciate you coming through every single day. And until we all speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, enjoy your holidays safely. Hopefully you're with family, friends, or doing something you love. And we'll see you next time on Locked On Commanders, Locked On Falcons, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.